Some great reporting from Li Feng at The Intercept about how a last-minute Trump rule may really hobble the federal government in terms of protecting consumers from price gouging, especially from these coronavirus vaccine makers. Let's go ahead and throw this tear sheet up on the screen. So bear with me because this is a tiny bit complicated, but we've talked about some of this stuff here before. It used to be that when government funded research into new pharmaceuticals, that would actually stay in the public domain. Well, that changed in some of the deregulation era in the 90s. And when that changed and they started licensing this research and the ability to profit off of it out into the commercial market, they put some protections in place. In particular, what's called the Bayh-Dole Act has a provision that basically says, look, if these assholes take this public research and they're gouging consumers on the other side of it, the federal government can march in, they call that march in rights, and they can change the price, they can have price controls, they can actually seize the patent, so they have a lot of tools at their disposal. But the way that this rule is written, they say they have to make it available, the drug makers have to make it available on reasonable terms, reasonable being the key word here. So what the Trump administration said is reasonable terms doesn't take into account price. We don't care what price you charge, and we want to write the rule explicitly so we don't pay any attention to whether or not you're gouging consumers with extraordinarily high prices. So they put that new rule into place towards the end of the Trump administration. It's going through now the rulemaking changing process. And so far, the Biden administration, they could roll that back to change it back to the original interpretation, which very explicitly does focus on whether you're price gouging consumers. But they haven't actually done it yet, and they haven't said anything about whether they're going to block that rule change from coming into place. So it's a little bit complicated, but the bottom line is this. The federal government used to have a better ability to keep drug makers from price gouging you. The Trump administration tried to roll that back, and so far, the Biden administration hasn't done anything to change course.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that we're talking about this because that's the most important thing. And this also shows why control over these little things in administrative law matter a lot. This is called administrative law making, basically, which is that you can change the way the law is enforced as long as you allow a public comment period. That's what we're in right now. And then it basically has to go into effect. This is the way the vast majority of regulations that govern your and my lives are enacted, and we almost have zero input. This is actually a big thing libertarians care a lot about because they're against the ability to do this. But I think what you need is a little bit more small d democracy whenever it comes to enforcing some of these things. And it's important because what you're basically seeing, and of course this is a classic Trump move, right, where he's like, oh, we're going to make it easier on facts, on pharma, is like by requiring them to put the price in the commercials on TV, and at the same time doing something like this. It's just a classic thing that people in this administration did while talking a big game on elsewhere. And I think that it's a big question for the Biden people. Are they going to allow this stuff to happen? Because let's be honest, Pharma owns everybody, right? And Steve Ricchetti, I believe, who is the deputy chief of staff at the White House, his brother was hired by a ton of pharma companies at this time. They are spending oceans of money right now in order to protect vaccine IP and the ability in order to charge dramatically more in the future. And it's just a classic way of how real power here in D.C. works.
Well, and here's the bottom line in terms of the pharmaceutical makers. They love to say, oh, we need all this patent protection and exclusivity, and we charge these high prices so that we can invest all this money in research of life-saving drugs. And by and large, that is a total and complete lie. Every single one of the new drug molecules that were invented over the past decade were done so, at least in part, by public funding and government research. Okay, that's where the overwhelming majority of actual life-saving inventions and innovation is taking place. And then that research is handed off to the private sector where they profit handsomely. This is one of the few small tools that the government has to be able to check their ability to price gouge you off of research that you funded as a U.S. taxpayer. Like the inventions that you funded and participated in, they then turn around and try to price gouge you. This is one of the few checks that remains in place, and Trump tried to strip it. We'll see if the Biden administration does anything to roll back that that deterioration in the rights of the federal government.
That's right.
Next week on Rising, Chuck Rocha, Philip Wegman, Zed Jelani, Ryan Graham, they'll all be here.
Remember to hit the subscribe button. Don't miss any of our videos. Don't forget to like and share as well. And we will see you all later.
Have a great weekend, guys.